Good afternoon. Thank you for having us today. It's very exciting to be part of the book week. I'm Silvia Micheli. I work at the University of Queensland.
And I'm Léa-Catherine Szacka. I work at the University of Manchester.
And today we are here to present our new book, Paolo Portoghesi, Architecture Between History, Politics and Media, that we have just published for Bloomsbury in October 2023. Here you can see the cover of the book with a young Portoghesi standing in one of his projects, the Church of Salerno in 1970, holding his Hasselblad camera.
Yeah, we really like this image. I have to say it took us a long time to find a perfect image for the cover, but we really liked it because, as you will discover now, Portoghesi was also an architect, but also a photographer. And so it was very nice to have a picture of him inside one of his buildings with his camera. The book it's important to say, is part of a series that was started by Bloomsbury a few years ago called Studies in Modern Architecture. Here you see just a few of the titles. The very first one, published by Hilde Heinen on Sibyl Molinaghi, Ernesto Nathan Rogers, Pagan, but I think they are about 8 titles so far. So when we had already started to work on this project, in fact, we've worked on this project for about 8 years, I think, obviously doing other things in the meantime. But we combined, so we met first in 2012 at a conference, and Silvia and I decided to combine both expertise, let's say, me having worked on the Biennale, and obviously the figure of Portoghesi was quite important for the first Venice Biennale, and Silvia having done a lot of work on Italian architecture. And when we heard about this book series, it was fitting quite well because it's really a series that is trying to bring to light the work of architects that perhaps are a little bit are significant, but perhaps a little bit less studied. So we thought that Portoghesi would fit perfectly in that series.
So we decided to write a critical essay on Paolo Portoghesi, recognizing him as a very polyedric figure, an architect, an historian, a critic, a designer, an educator, a political insider, and a curator, but most of all, a mediator that was able to talk to very different people. And the scene of Italy in the postmodern period was populated by very different architects with different ideologies, political backgrounds, and operative ways. He was able to mediate between different realities. He was director of the Biennale. He was operating in the political scene of the Italian Socialist Party. And he was also embedded in the university context, working and traveling between Milan, Rome, and Venice. So this natural oscillation of Portoghesi between different realities made him the perfect protagonist of the cultural Italian scene to investigate. And through the investigation of Portoghesi, the main aim of the book is that of unpacking the production of postmodern culture in Italy.
Portoghesi was, I'm just going to continue on that image because it's quite a strong one. He was often described as elegant, suave, discreet. He has come across as a formidable negotiator, and you can see from this image that we chose to put in the introduction, and that people are quite surprised when they see this young Portoghesi, who at the time was dean of a school of architecture. So that also shows his multiple facets, let's say. He was working between people that are quite important or quite famous, maybe who have been written about even more than him, people like Bruno Zevi or Manfredo Tafuri. So he was for a long time really in a triangle between these two forces of the architectural theory scene, architectural history and theory scene in Italy. But he was also in between different experimental line of design. So for example, the line put forward by Aldo Rossi or the line put forward by someone like Alessandro Mendini, which were, would say, both postmodern, but in a different way. And Portoghesi played the unique role of really representing the commonalities of all these people and bringing together the divergence of Italian architects and scholars, and to find new strategies of intervention. Here you see him with his parents. We also explain how, you know, his life and his upbringing might have explained this kind of facility of being a mediator. And it was precisely this polyvalence and this sense of adaptability that have distinguished Portoghesi as a unique protagonist of architecture in the second half of the 20th century. So it's really his figure as a mediator that we put forward in this book. You will see right now with the way we structure the book and the table of content. And we really wanted to also reposition him, not only in the Italian context, but also in the international context.
It is important to understand this is not a monographic book. We made the choice of writing a critical book to reassess the role and career and life of Portoghesi, to reassess the postmodern production of Italy, and also postmodern production of Italy in the context of the international scene, of which Portoghesi has been completely central, as he has been actively promoting postmodern culture in Italy, but at the same time, he has been really active and proactive in trying to deprovincialize the Italian postmodern culture and establishing dialogues outward looking towards different nations, towards England, towards France, towards the United States, just to mention a few.
So what we did is, this is the table of content. We wanted to show it to you to give an idea. So we have 4 main chapters. The first one is more of a foundation, but the chapter 2, 3, and 4 are really representing this 3 major dimensions of the work of Portoghesi that we wanted to put forward. So in the case of Portoghesi, we wanted to focus on first, architectural history and how he used architectural history as a productive vehicle for design. So he was both a designer and an historian, which is quite an unusual figure. The second point is political. So his involvement in politics, and also it's related to the shift in Italy towards a more liberating ideology that was promoted by the Socialist Party. So we show how that has an impact on his architecture and how he views architecture. And then finally, the media aspect. So Portoghesi was a very mediatic figure. He appeared on television, cinema, but also his houses were used, or some of his architecture was used in cinema. He was very much involved in events like the Biennale magazine. So we really show how he embraced de facto this vehicle of media for the construction and dissemination of architectural ideas. So it's by connecting these 3 elements and showing how they represent really a whole, a triangle, so to speak. So we talked a lot about triangle. The triangle of history, politics, and media creates really the particularity of Portoghesi's modus operandi. So ultimately, what we want to show with the book is that whereas elsewhere in the Western culture, maybe these 3 components are there, but they are perhaps separated in the centrality of history, the involvements in politics, and the mediatization of architecture was something that is quite typical of the 70s and 80s. But in Portoghesi, they really appear as being synthesized in one single figure. He was an historian, a political operator, a cultural operator, and a communicator at the same time. And we also wanted to show that this combination would have been improbable elsewhere than in Rome, which at the end of the day is the cradle of history, the political center of Italy, but also is known for being Hollywood on the Tevere. So all these streets, the particularity of this city of Rome, which is this city, was very important in the.
So, looking at the table of contents and delving into the pages of the book, the reviewer and the readers will notice that there is not, maybe surprisingly, not a chapter dedicated to the first Venice Biennale of Architecture, therefore dedicated to the Strada Novissima and the presence of the past exhibition. And this has been a very deliberate choice that Léa-Catherine and I have taken, a sort of, we call it a sort of sacrifice, but that was a necessary step to disentangle the established ways of or interpretative ways to look and assess Portoghesi, because we wanted, in fact, read this plurality of point of view, and work in the interstices of them. So we have been actively talk about the Biennale in many points of the book, but in a way we have scattered the reading of this event in order to bring up in evidence other aspects that have been overlooked because of the aura and the attention that the Biennale has concentrated on Portoghesi. So by, in a way, decentralizing the Biennale event, the first Biennale event, we have been able to concentrate and reevaluate other aspects like, you know, politics and media, for instance, but also history in a completely new way.
And here you see on the image, for example, we talked before about his role on the international scene. So these are examples of archival image that were that I think, to my knowledge, have never been published. And this is showing Portoghesi in an event with people like Emilio Amba, Sarato Isosaki, Stanley Tigerman. So really showing that he was at the center of this international scene. And that brings me to talk just quickly about sources that we use in this study. So those, for example, are two images that of Portoghesi's building taken by Portoghesi, because I mentioned that he was also he liked to photograph his building in also a particular manner. So we use, of course, all this archival material that we were able to access, but also drawings from the Centre Pompidou, the Maxi collection, and the Moschini gallery in Rome, as well as a lot of media. So newspapers, we did a lot of research in Italian newspapers, but also television, films. A lot of things are available on YouTube. So we really use that media material as a source. And obviously books. So Portoghesi himself has written a lot of books because we are both, well, Silvia is Italian and I speak Italian. We were able to access, obviously, the sources in Italian. So his own book were a very important sort of primary source. And also books about him. It's something that also we forgot to mention at the beginning, is that we did not there was no, when we started this work, there was no book in English. There was no comprehensive book about Portoghesi in English. And even in Italian, there are a few, but they were mostly written by people, either Portoghesi's collaborator or wife, so people that were very close to him, so not really with a critical distance, let's say. But nevertheless, we did meet, and you know, oral history and meeting with Portoghesi was a big part of the work. We did meet with him several occasions. The last time was in July 2022. Unfortunately, he passed away about 6 months ago, or 6 months before the book was published, but he knew about the project and was very supportive. So we had several conversations, which maybe did not bring new materials, but for sure helped us to confront our ideas, or to fine-tune our thoughts, and to check with him some hypotheses that we had. We also talked with a lot of people around him. Yeah.
Okay, let's go back to the table of contents and delve a little bit into the structure of the book and of each chapters. As we said, the book is not a monograph, is a critical book. And the 4 chapters, the Postmodern Project, Turn to History, Socialism for Freedom, and Embracing Mass Media, operate like analytical transects of the career and life of Portoghesi, but also historical transects of the period under investigation, which is the postmodern cultural period of Italy. Each chapter is introduced by a very specific image. Léa-Catherine and I have been working with images very thoroughly. We had the luck of having access to some of the photographic archive of Paolo Portoghesi, but also we had access to other archives like the Getty and the San Pompidou. So we want to acknowledge all these sources and all the people who have helped us to analyze, to have access to this incredible material and analyze some of the images that are so important for our analysis. So these 4 images, each one at the beginning of each chapter, operate as temporal windows. So they are very specific and very precise about the description and the scene of the period in which Portoghesi was embedded. And they open the context in which he operated. So with those images, we really hope to project the reader into that historical period. Of course, then we continue with the description. A thorough description of the image is, again, to really provide all the details and the keywords and concepts of that temporal windows. And of course, then the chapter delves into the main argument of these 3 pillars that constitute the postmodern what we have called the Postmodern Project deployed by Portoghesi. Each of the chapter concludes with the analysis of one specific building. And here is very important to remind the readers that Portoghesi and his office have had a huge production, quite constant from the very inception of the career of Portoghesi until the end. And so for us, it was not possible to go through all of them. So we have picked 4 main buildings. For the Postmodern Project, we have concluded the chapter with the analysis of the Galleria Apollodoro, on which Léa-Catherine will elaborate very soon. For the Turn to History, we have chosen Casa Baldi, which has been the very first building to really project Portoghesi into the national and international scene. The Socialist for Freedom, the chapter dedicated to politics, ends with the analysis of the Mosque of Rome, which is probably Portoghesi's masterpiece, and a very strategic project, because it's not just the mediation between different political parties and different parties in the cities, but is also of Rome, but is also a thorough mediation and dialogue, point of dialogue between 2 strategic geographical and geopolitical part of the world. Now, let's delve into each chapter, describing a little bit what we have done and the main argument for us.
Yeah, we will go quickly on the 4 chapters because I see that it's now already a lot of time. So the first chapter, as Silvia mentioned, we have every time this iconic image. So the first chapter really talks about the postmodern project. As I said, it's a bit like the foundation of the three others, and it opens by outlining Portoghesi's role as an impresario of the Italian postmodern architecture. So you see in this cover of Domus from 1980, you see how he was pictured as a sort of dandy impresario. So we really wanted to show his agenda to bring about this disciplinary reform of modern architecture, transitioning into postmodern architecture at that time. We also show in this project, as Silvia, in this chapter, sorry, as Silvia mentioned before, his collaboration with Aldo Rossi, which was a lifelong thing, but really culminated in the project of the Teatro del Mondo in Venice. So we remind also how he operated with different people to deploy his postmodern project. And also talk about Mendini, and then finally finishes on this project of the Apollodoro, which was a gallery that Portoghesi opened with his wife in Rome in the 1980s, and was really a high point of postmodern culture in Rome at that time. So we talk about this project and what kind of events were happening there.
The chapter Turn to History is an important chapter in the unpacking of the figure of Portoghesi, as it really insists on this duality of Portoghesi, both as a historian and a designer. And in fact, in the way he presents himself as an architect who instrumentalized history, who used history to refine a design method to build his buildings. Clearly, we all know that Portoghesi was one of the maximum experts on Baroque architecture and culture, but for Portoghesi, history was the whole history of architecture. And so the chapter opens with this very striking image of he and Giovanna Massoglio, his wife, sitting in the lounge of their residence in the Torino di Via di Porta Pinciani in Rome in the 70s. And you can see these lounges, the inventory, or reflecting the mental inventory of historical sources that Portoghesi had to his disposal for his design production. We have delved into the technique he used, the importance of geometry, the use of technique of lap dissolves, of how very shortly how to merge different sources and achieve new results. And this is in the belief and with the main goal of disentangling the dogma of modern architecture and opening up to a plurality of options in design, which has been one of the main missions of Portoghesi, something that he even discussed with his master Borromini in an impossible interview that he gave in the 70s in a radio show, which is a very bright and inventive document of his way of instrumentalizing history to build contemporary architecture. The chapter concludes with the analysis of Casa Baldi, or the rehabilitation of the curve, as we have called it, in which we have tried to explain how the application of Portoghesi of history into design. Casa Baldi is a great piece of architecture built between 59 and 61, is still standing and visitable in Rome. Léa-Catherine and myself have gone in 2022 to visit it, and it has been an amazing experience to walk in these spaces and really experience the freedom that Portoghesi has been deploying in postmodern architectural culture in Italy.
So the third chapter, Socialist for Freedom, as we said before, analyzes really the political implication of postmodern architecture in the 70s and 80s through the involvement of Portoghesi in the Italian Socialist Party. And it's really important to understand Portoghesi's postmodern project, that Portoghesi's postmodern project was intrinsically linked to these ideals of freedom that were promoted by, for example, a very important figure, the leader of the Socialist Party, Bettino Craxi. So we elaborate on this and on how Portoghesi have been very close to Craxi and also followed his or being there in terms of design and of materializing these ideals into forms and shape. This is the first, the significant image is an image of Portoghesi going to the Biennale when he was president with the mayor of Venice, so also showing his implication at the Biennale, not only, so he was first director of the architecture sector in 1980, but then he was for 8 years the president of the Biennale, which is, as you know, I'm sure, is a very, very prestigious and important place to hold in the Italian cultural scene and even international scene. So how he also played the politics in these cultural role was important. Yeah, so also we talk about how he was involved. So in 1968, Portoghesi was the dean, a very young dean of the Politecnico School of Architecture in Milan, and he was directly thrown into the demonstrations of 1968, and he was also there able to be very political in also playing the mediator between the students and the administration of the university. So we go back on this episode of his life as well. And then, as Silvia mentioned before, we finish with this incredible project of the Mosque in Rome, which is probably of all his projects, the one that most sorry, not paradoxically, most represent his involvements with politics, because of course the mosque, the construction of the mosque was very much linked to oil money and to the relationship that Italy was having with the Arab country at the time. So we disentangle all this history.
Embracing mass media is the last chapter, and it is important here to understand that all the chapters are related to each other, and it is not possible to extrapolate one from the other three. So the three pillars, politics, media, and history, really form integrally inform the postmodern project of Paolo Portoghesi, who has been one of the first to embrace mass media in the moment that TV and cinema were really emerging with particular strength, very enthusiastically and very proactively, to such a extent that he himself became an actor in the movie Utopia, and also his houses, namely Casa Baldi, Casa Andreis, and Casa Papanice, acted as film stages for 3 movies released in the 70s. Also, Portoghesi was not just linked to cinema through himself, but also his projects. He was also very much into the production of journals, and the image we were seeing before, the cover of his journal Controspazio, which he founded and he launched in Milan in 1969, at the year of the Politecnico, when he was dean, is a very indicative tool of communication with the younger generation of students. So he was able to interpret their needs, to interpret their voices, and really create a group around himself of young people debating and expressing ideas about architecture. So the ways Portoghesi really embraced mass media, used them and personalized them to broadcast his message is something quite new at the time, and something that has been really an example for generations to come.
And finally, we end with an epilogue that is a very short chapter, but it was important for us to have this epilogue which revolves around the year 1982. So the book finishes somehow in 1982. It was a conscious decision for us because, as Silvia mentioned before, Portoghesi had a huge career also after 1982, but this year really acts as a turning point in his professional and personal life, and it's considered in general as an annus horribilis for Italian architectural culture and maybe even for Italy altogether. So it's the year of the famous inquest of Mani Pulite, or clean hands, which condemned a lot of people and took off, unveiling a system of corruption that profoundly affected the Italian construction industry. So Portoghesi was, it was a memorable date in his career, and also a date that coincided with his completion of the second mandate as a president of the Venice Biennale. So there's really a before and after 1992. It also marks the dusk of the Socialist Party. And so we decided to end with this year, explaining this episode, and explaining also how this is the year where Portoghesi moves with his wife, Masobrio, to their retreat in Calcutta, a small medieval city near Rome, where they built an enormous house, farm, library, castle. And this is a picture that I took when we went there in July 2022 of Portoghesi and his house. So the book really ends on this. And we really show how Calcutta was finally the way or the place where Portoghesi could combine all these three pillars of his personality in one single project, in a way.
And the book ends with a coda by Maristella Casciato. Maristella as being a collaborator of Portoghesi, he knew him and Giovanna Masobrio very well, and she has been kindly offering completing the book with a personal account of that very period. So it's a beautiful way to conclude the book.